Hello and welcome to this new SASI Lunchbreak edition, the first edition of the springtime. The room is quickly filling up, so we are going to get started. My name is Annette Ciroli-Harms from the Policy Institute for Consumer Policy, and I'm really thrilled to be back presenting this edition. And especially I'm excited about this particular Lunchbreak edition because it is kind of a sequel to a similar topic that we presented roughly around this time of year 1 year ago. So I'm really curious to see how the topic has advanced and what has happened in the meantime. So recently, you've probably all been preoccupied around new tariff announcements and sort of global developments at the world scale. But also in our sustainable supply chain universe, it has been a week full of events as well, just a week and also a few months full of events. First, the EUDR has been postponed, and now also the CSDDD and the CSRD have been voted to be postponed and might be amended. But nevertheless, they will come. These regulations are going to come through, and we are very much interested in following closely what it's going to mean to be compliant and to fulfill all of these types of regulations. So I remember very clearly around this time of last year that many of the organizations we regularly are in touch with through the lunch breaks and beyond, they were all very worried about how can they fulfill the EUDR requirements, how they can become compliant and respect the different rules around risk analysis and absence of risk to import into the EU. So the EUDR is coming, and so depending on what you have or have not done over the course of the last year, today we have presentations by people who have been very busy preparing and especially preparing for the types of data needs and the type of data processing that is required to be EUDR compliant, but also compliant and sort of doing your due diligence beyond the EUDR. So what is on our agenda today? We are going to speak around the latest advances around building digital public infrastructure. So open source approaches of collecting and processing data for EUDR compliance and beyond. For this, we have two fantastic speakers here with us today. First, the GIZ is going to present their project SAFE, which stands for Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems, and how it supports building this public data infrastructure, DPI. And afterwards, we have someone from the World Resources Institute who will present you practical examples and what it means to build and use the DPI on their forest data partnership. So we have lots of interesting contents, but as usual, there will be time for your questions. Also, this session is, as usual, recorded and will be published later on, so you can share it with interested colleagues. So do feel free throughout the entire presentation to post your questions via our chat function, and then we will later get to that Q&A. But before we dive into the program, I would like to hand over to Mr. David Löw from Division 122 at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, the BMZ. He is going to give you now some opening remarks. Please, Mr. Löw, please join us here on stage.
Thank you so much. Yeah, it's my pleasure to also welcome you on behalf of the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development to today's 5th SASI lunch break on due diligence in supply chains. Well, in this well-established format, on the first Friday of every month, we present different practice-oriented tools and guidelines with the goal of demonstrating that the implementation of corporate due diligence is doable, is feasible. And we are thus very much hoping that this lunch break can support you in your respective efforts. Well, we as Ministry are working on the framework conditions for sustainable, fair, and inclusive global agricultural value chains. Well, we are doing this not in isolation, well, as we have heard already, but within a legal framework comprising the German Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, the EUDR, and the CSDDD. And these directives all place, as we know, new demands on companies who will need to prove that they are meeting legal due diligence and requirements. And well, this creates the need to trace and securely document the origins and the sustainable production of agricultural products. And obviously, digital approaches can play a key role in addressing this need. So in today's lunch break, we will discuss how to strengthen emerging digital trends along supply chains. And we will focus in particular on the topic of digital public infrastructure, or in short, DPI. Well, DPI is arguably the cornerstone of a connected and sustainable agricultural sector. The idea here is that DPI is providing open, accessible, and secure systems that enable standardized formats and interoperable systems. Well, the understanding to have a certain set of standards is grasping the notion DPI to me very well. Well, a set of standards existing to ensure traceability and thereby positively impacting information flows and trust within supply chains. Well, ensuring documentation of corporate due diligence, while at the same time addressing issues such as deforestation and sustainable farming and trading practices. And this digital pathway can only be successful through strong collaboration, where governments, NGOs, producers, and businesses have to work together to share knowledge and to develop and also to scale inclusive digital solutions. Well, we as ministry are therefore supporting a close consortium, including DEASCA, SAFE, the Linux Foundation, ACSTAC, World Research Institute, FAO, CGIAR, and many others to work on prototypes for an integrated and open source digital public infrastructure. And I do very much believe that this initiative demonstrates how collective expertise can drive innovation and sustainable development. And over the past couple of months, this consortium has developed several prototypes, which we will later hear from more. Well, we are currently in the process of implementing these prototypes in Kenya, Colombia, Laos, and Vietnam, where they will contribute to broad-based public digital infrastructure, as well as to peer learning. And yeah, I'm also very pleased that today World Research Institute and GSZ SAFE will be sharing their experiences on working towards digital public infrastructure. Yeah, and I'm now looking forward to today's session and to get valuable new insights into this thriving topic. And thank you very much for joining today's session. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much, David, for these introductory remarks and indeed for setting the scene for this important session. So now we don't want to keep the content away from you any longer. I would like to invite Gyde Feddersen onto our stage for her presentation. Gyde works at the GIZ in the project Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems, SAFE, on the topics of digitalization and digital public infrastructure, which she is going to present today. She's been with GIZ since 2017 and has previously worked in the cocoa and coffee sectors. So Gyde, welcome. Thank you for being here, and please enlighten us with your presentation.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. So my name is Gyde Feddersen, and I work at the GIZ project Sustainable Agriculture for Forest Ecosystems, short SAFE, on the topics of digitalization and digitalization and digital public infrastructure. All right, a few words on SAFE in general. So the project is co-funded by BMZ, the EU, and the Netherlands. The goal is to contribute to the conservation of forests and to the sustainable management of agri-food systems. We are implementing in 10 countries around the 7 EUDR relevant commodities like coffee, cocoa, rubber, and others. In addition to the implementation within the countries, SAFE is also hosting the Secretariat of the Team Europe initiative on zero deforestation, and the goal is to contribute to global knowledge exchange and networking. So this is a quick glance at the SAFE implementation countries. As mentioned, we're active in 10 countries, each country with a specific focus on an EUDR relevant commodity. Like Uganda, it's coffee, Ecuador, it's coffee and cocoa. And SAFE is also active on a global scale, like on gender equity and social inclusion or on green financing, and on digital public infrastructure, which is what this lunch break is about. So first of all, what is digital public infrastructure, or DPI in short? So DPI refers to shared and interoperable digital systems. You can think of digital public infrastructure like a railroad systems. So just like railroads, they provide a foundational track for trains to transport people or goods efficiently. DPI lays down the digital tracks for seamless transactions like data exchange. So much like how railroads enable businesses trade and travel without each company having to build its own tracks, DPI ensures that governments or businesses or individuals can operate in a shared digital framework without reinventing the wheel every time or building its own tracks, so to speak. What drives us regarding digital approaches? So the different due diligence legislations like the EUDR in our case, they mandate greater transparency from supply chain actors. So in a way, digital becomes mandatory. However, the reality is often a little bit more complicated. In many cases, there's still a lack of access to digital solutions. Digital markets are fragmented, which can create barriers to enter or operate within the market. There's a lack of standard approaches, which means that there's no interoperability between digital solutions, for example, for data exchange. And very importantly, there's still a lack of data sovereignty, especially for smallholder farmers. This can result in additional burdens then and create economic dependencies. These are especially then severe for smallholder farmers, which are at the risk of being excluded from the markets. And so what are the key elements of building a DPI? Well, in our case, there's different building blocks. There's the technology building blocks and there's the human and policy building blocks. For the technical building blocks, we have open standards like georeferences that allow for data exchange or interoperability. There's identifiers like farmer IDs or field geo IDs, so you can identify the plots that you are mapping. And there's public data also, like land cover maps or satellite imagery. Then there's the human and policy aspects, like enabling rules for data ownership or data security and establishing trust mechanisms. There's also the governance aspect, so who's responsible for the private or public hosting, and very importantly, also the funding of the digital public infrastructure. And also not to forget the business model so that you can create a DPI that's long-lasting. So all of these elements are then ideally flanked by the implementation at the national level, as well as through global alignment, exchange, and coordination. So in our case, DIASCA, which is short for the Digital Integration of Agricultural Supply Chain Alliance, in collaboration with the Forest Data Partnership, is supporting the community building aspect of DPI. So the community is important to developing a DPI to ensure that it's inclusive and that it addresses the needs of those that it serves. And this is basically what DIASCA and FDAP are doing. And I also really want to highlight the human and policy aspects of DPI. So the tech building blocks, they are important. Without them, there is no digital public infrastructure. But at the very core, DPI is also financed and hosted and regulated by policy aspects. So while DPI is a tech topic, we should not lose track of what DPI is essentially trying to achieve, which is creating a more inclusive and efficient digital ecosystem. And then lastly, I will not go into this slide into detail, as I think this will be done by Laura from the World Resources Institute later on. This is just to show that we are working together with our partners, the World Resources Institute, FAO, and the Linux Foundation to create different open access digital tools and standards to integrate technologies such as field boundary mapping or forest mapping and traceability systems, all of which are interoperable with each other. Yeah, and this is basically the end of my presentation. Thank you very much, and I will hand over back to you, Annette.
Thank you so much, Gudi. This was really interesting, and I think especially interesting to see sort of from the basics, what is a DPI, why is it important, what can it achieve? So thank you. I have never heard the analogy to railroad, so I think that was very, very insightful. Thank you very much. We're going to see you later again for the question and answers. So yes, indeed, you can already ask your questions in the chat function, but we are going to have a joint Q&A at the end, because also our next speaker, who I'm going to introduce to you today, right now, is going to talk more about the details on DPI. So please welcome everyone, Laura Vary, who is the director of the Forest Data Partnership, a global coalition of many actors, also as we've heard from the BMZ, actors including the public and the private sectors. And their goal is really to end commodity-driven deforestation and accelerate restoration. She also has experience from feature development for Map Builder in Madagascar and Liberia, as well as in restoration work at the Denver Botanic Gardens and academic research on restoring degraded forests in Australia. She is joining from the US, so it is early morning for her. So give her a thoughtful round of applause, even though we can't hear it. For Laura, please, the floor is yours for your presentation.
Thank you so much, and I really am very excited to be here with all of you today. It's an honor to be part of this lunch break series. It's gotten quite a reputation amongst our circles, so I feel very pleased to be here with all of you. As she said, I'm from the World Resources Institute, and I'm really happy to talk to you about the Forest Data Partnership today. So the Forest Data Partnership started in 2021, and we brought the founding partners together that included World Resources Institute, but also FAO is co-leading this with us. And our other founding partners include Google, Unilever, and the NASA Surveyor Network. And we really wanted to understand how to get data more accessible and into the hands of people who needed it, particularly when it comes to reducing deforestation in supply chains. So our first year and a half, we really did a lot of research and engaged with stakeholders and asked them what are the major challenges that you are still facing when it comes to doing traceability and transparency in agricultural supply chains. And we collated all of this in a very large report. I highly recommend that you at least read the blog that QR code directs you to, but the report contains lots of information and surveys all of the existing information that we had at the time on these systems. And we drilled down into two major problems that still occur, and what those big buckets are geolocations and traceability and forest and land monitoring. And so the Forest Data Partnership, for each of these challenges, we engage with partners and stakeholders to align on the foundational data gaps or the challenges that still remain with data. And then we develop and innovate demand-driven approaches to solve those different gaps and challenges. And then for each of the data solutions, we want to deploy in existing mechanisms as much as possible. And so you'll be seeing some examples of that when it comes to digital public infrastructure. We did not want to create new tools or new platforms. We wanted to make things that exist already be more interconnected and interoperable with each other. And then, of course, we want to assess our impact, make sure we're testing our assumptions and that we're actually doing the work that leads to the outcomes we want to have and achieve. So the partnership really started with USG funding under USAID and US State Department, but then we really attracted a larger breadth of donors, including the SAFE project, which we're very grateful for. And we really created a more flexible, nimble partnership model where we have the core at the center that's directing funding to the to the major pieces of work that we have identified need funding, but then we're also working with other partners and trying to leverage existing work and projects that those partners have to make this connections between people as much as possible. So I know it's hard to see this, but we've mapped out the whole partnership, and it's actually been very exciting to see all these different things. And so that was really phase 1 of the partnership. And now we're excited to go into the implementation phase 2 of the project, which will be really focusing on these 4 priority work streams that sorry, I'm skipping slides in my brain, I apologize. But for the second phase of the project, we'll be focusing on these key pieces of work innovation we've already started, expanding our strategic partnerships, and of course, fundraising. So digital public infrastructure is kind of an underpinning piece of these work streams. All of these other pieces feed into digital public infrastructure. So I'll be highlighting a little bit the community models and the convergence of evidence, and then I'm going to deep dive further into the data standards and governance piece of digital public infrastructure. So when it comes to needing to understand how deforestation is occurring in your supply chain, of course, you need to know where forests are occurring, but you also need to understand where those commodities exist and when those commodities were established. And so with Google, we've been mapping out different commodities through a community learning method. If you go to that QR code, it gives you a lot more information about how these models were created. It gives you access to those models, which are available through Google Earth Engine. And we've started with palm, and then we've expanded now to cocoa and rubber. Coffee will be coming soon. And then the forest persistence model is kind of our forest degradation model that we're piloting with FSC and a couple of other people to see how that's working. These models are really built on data that's already available in the open access systems and built through AI machine learning models to build the best probability models. So it needs better data to improve and continue to improve and be as accurate as possible and representing where these commodities are and when they were established. We are always happy to talk to people who have data or who want to use these models, so please reach out. This is an important piece of digital public infrastructure, and you'll see how it fits in a second. The second priority work stream that we've really advanced far with FAO is convergence of evidence. And you've heard a piece of this 1 year ago with my colleague Remy D'Annunzio from FAO, but I wanted to highlight it again because it's pretty central to how we're approaching this when it comes to trying to show compliance in a supply chain. And our ethos, our approach here is that no data set is going to solve this problem for you. No single data set is going to fall from the sky and say, here you go. You really need to have multiple layers of information to support compliance claims. And the national circumstances and data sets that are available for that geography really need to be taken into account. You can't only rely on global data. And you need to have robust, transparent, and reproducible analyses that rely on public data and open data. So this particular publication will take you to some more resources, particularly when it comes to our tool that we use called WISP, or What is in That Plot. Remy and FAO have developed many resources on this, and happy to direct you further to it. I did just want to show kind of what the workflow is, because this ties directly into the next slide on digital public infrastructure. But what WISP does, and this idea of convergence of evidence, takes the existing open data that's in the public sphere on tree cover and forest cover, on the different commodities that are available, and then on when the disturbance happened, whether it was before or after the 2020 baseline. And then it applies that to your polygon, or group of polygons, depending on what your needs are. And then you get a risk assessment out at the end in terms of if it was established, when it was established, if you've had tree cover before or after 2020, if you need to do some more investigation to have better data to really confirm compliance or not. And so then these all connect together to form the technical backbone of digital public infrastructure. And this is at the beginning where you need to have some way of mapping out your polygon, your farm. There's several different tools that are available to do this. We developed one with Google called Open Forest Ground that connects directly into our system. There's several others. There's TechnoServe and EnoTrace, obviously, that have different functionalities on top of that. So I highly recommend that you use the tool or the application that best suits your needs, and then have it plug in to the digital public infrastructure as you go. The second piece that is critical is a registered asset registry, where you're registering your polygons into a system so that it can be quality controlled and it can be recognized as an established farm or polygon that you sourced from. There are, as far as I know, there are only 2 global options available for this, and we support a public, openly available one run by the ACSTAC project by the Linux Foundation called the Universal Asset Registry. This is where you get an alphanumeric string of numbers for your polygon after you've registered it, and that string of numbers is what's associated with your geometry. And it can be plugged into these other systems to show what your deforestation risk could be. And it's also a possibility for you to reduce your file size type. You don't have to use GeoJSON files anymore. If you have an alphanumeric string of your georeferenced ID, that is a much smaller memory bit, and it can be uploaded to the EU information system. Hopefully in the future, we are hoping to make that a functionality, because we see it as solving one of the big pain points when it comes to this particular problem. After you have those things, then you need to connect to that geospatial data that we talked about. I think it's really important to use open data first. So that's why we built WISP, as a way for you to have access to that open data right there and have the first run of calculations done for you on all of the best data that's available in that particular area, and then identify where you may need to go find additional data or additional satellite imagery to get more answers. It probably won't be for all of your polygons, but it may be for some of them. So here's the technical backbone from our perspective for digital public infrastructure. You don't need to use only one set of tools that is agreed on. What needs to happen is the tools that work for you can plug into this system, and they can be interoperable and interconnected with each other. If you don't have that ability, the system breaks down, and then everyone gets frustrated because they have to build their own system. They have to build their own railway network. So here's where you need to have the trains running between these different spots so that they all able to work together. But as Greta mentioned, a big piece of how you get that system to flow and work together is actually this people workflow. And what are the key pieces of ways of policy, of information sharing that need to be identified and standardized so that this can work and doesn't break down? We've identified these, and I just want to walk you through kind of how we identified them and why we chose these topics. So it starts here with an example user story of somebody in a geolocation data, trying to get geolocation data for their supply chain. And you might start by asking this question of, has my area already been mapped, and by who? And then initially you're going to come across one of the biggest pain points, which is challenges to data sharing. Can that data be shared? Who has it? And in what way was it collected under to be shared with other people? Then you're going to come across a lack of widely adopted consent procedures. Currently, there's a few different standards out there, but there's no one standard that people are using when it comes to consent procedures for collecting this data, and then being able to show that in your data sharing agreement so that people have confidence that you collected this data with consent. Then once you have this data, is it the quality that you need? Is it doing what you does it have all the information in there that you need in order to make sure that you're answering all the questions? Is it standardized? Is it of a high enough quality? And can it be shared technically? Is it in this file type you can easily upload into your system? So this is where you run into a lack of data standardization and of interoperability. But then what happens when that data hasn't been mapped yet? So that farm maybe hasn't been reached yet, or it's not available for you in your system. Well, field level mapping is very resource intensive, and whose responsibility is it to map it? Is it along the supply chain? Who's actually in charge of mapping it? What we've seen so far, what we've heard, is that so many people have gotten mapped 6, 7, 8 times by different suppliers or producers or different traders coming and saying, we need to map your farm. And to the point where it's very frustrating for that farmer to have been mapped that many times. And then there's other farmers who have never been mapped once, or maybe they've been mapped once, but that data is not in any shareable system. So then it's lost, for better lack of a word. So then how do you there's no coordination right now in terms of distributing roles, responsibilities, and the resourcing for these kinds of mapping efforts, particularly making sure that they are then into a shared system or shared resource for people to use. And then making sure that that system is connected into these databases, so then these databases and systems and processes are connected with each other. And then finally, that we're closing the loop. All of this data can actually go to improve those community models that I showed at the beginning, so that your land cover monitoring data is getting better and is actually how you want it to show and represent the world. So this is just part of the data journey, and as we went through it, we recognized that we really need to bring together all of these groups working on these different pieces so that we can provide some best practice guidance. So we've formed kind of a data standards working group that brings together big projects working on this, like DIASCA, as was mentioned before, Aim for Forests, which is a project run out of FAO, and then the Forest Data Partnership. And all of these projects bring along with their partners. And we're trying to enable the most practical and implementable best practices and guidelines for people to be able to follow. So for instance, here's a template data sharing agreement that shows how the consent procedures were followed. And these consent procedures go back to the broader community that has convened around this work and agree that these are the best practices that need to be. That's just one example. So the topic areas that we're covering are data standardization and interoperability, data authorship management, control and access, consent processes, data confidentiality and security, and then collaborative solutions to data sharing. It's really important to note that this particular work is focused only on geolocation data. It's not on static data or volume data. We're starting out cross-commodity and cross-geography, trying to be as broad and general as possible, but recognizing very clearly that specific geographies or specific commodities will need kind of their own asterisks, specific and unique processes to those local laws and contexts or specific issues that underpin that particular value chain. A couple of examples of the work that we've already done. We've worked very strongly with the Roundtable on Sustainable Palm Oil, and at their most recent annual meeting, we convened a working group around what are these particular issues in these challenges, and who's already working on this that we can kind of connect people to. One thing that came out that was, I think, really important here is that the land tenure and policy that surrounds a lot of the different commodities in Indonesia differs on the commodity. So coffee is classified as a social forest in Indonesia, for instance, but palm oil requires a legal status change. And this is important when you're collecting the data to make sure you're including that in your metadata, et cetera. And then just this past November with FAO, we did a South-South exchange where we brought together FAO hosted many different governments. One of the topics was digital public infrastructure and these data standards. And it was really interesting to hear how these different governments have been approaching it in their particular context and to get the lessons learned between these different countries in terms of what they're establishing, the successes and the challenges. Was really interesting to know about the consent piece here and how critical that is to be attached to the data as you're sharing it so that it's very transparent to everyone along the digital public infrastructure chain what the consent pieces are. And so I just want to say, we did one, I haven't added in the slide, we just did this one a few weeks ago in the World Cocoa Foundation Annual Partners Meeting that has similar kind of through line here. So we're really excited to continue working with these partners, Tiasca and Aim for Forests. And the partners we're working with right now on this include Preferred by Nature and Meridia to further this specific pieces of work to have this guidance out. So the guidance should be available later this year to help with some of these different pieces. And we're very eager to talk with anybody who would like to join or have information to share. We would love to discuss further. So I will stop there. I hope I stayed on time, and I really appreciate being invited.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Laura. Yes, right on time. Thank you so much. I think that was really interesting. The questions are already bubbling up in the chat. So also maybe Güde join us back, and Laura, stay with us. Yes. So the first question that came in the chat, which is sort of a similar question, which I had noted down, is can you explain once again, what's the difference between digital public infrastructure, so DPI, and national systems developed by some of the producing countries?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that one. So these national systems, in that second bucket that we showed that had the different polygon asset registries, we were showing the global asset registries, but national systems really should be plugging in at that point too, where you're registering and you have the national systems connecting in at that point. And then it's really important that you have kind of, we showed a more global level, but you have kind of the federated node level local level that can then feed into the global level when necessary. And it's critically important because those national systems need to keep some data in the country. There are certain countries where certain pieces and kinds of data are not allowed to leave the borders of that country. They have to stay within that country. And so you need those national systems to help be those kind of collators of that data and can keep those important pieces private. But then the pieces that need to go on to the UDR, for instance, are then connected and looped into this bigger global system. So getting that connection piece is really important. We've already started working on some of this in Indonesia with some partners and systems that they're building in Indonesia. I know CGIAR has run some pilots in Honduras as well. So they have some interesting lessons learned from how that's been going. And I think it's the connection of the two and the layers that they have, the kind of nesting that they need to have, they're really important pieces together.
Great, thank you. There was also Lunchbreak last year around sort of empowerment through data and sort of who has the power over which data and why is it important that sort of different sources of data and sort of the rights to that data remain in certain hands. So if you in the audience are interested in following up on that, do go back. I would estimate around June last year, we had a session on that. And then speaking more sort of about sort of the foundations of DPI, can you just briefly explain once again, what's the business case for DPI and sort of how can their financing on a sustainable level be ensured for the long run? I mean, building a railway system is a big endeavor.
Shall I go first and then Laura, you can add on? So basically, the business case for DPI is the sharing of costs. So you can, it's a community of stakeholders that come together to build a DPI, and it's sustained in the long term. So it's a hybrid form of funding, I would say. And it's also about reducing the transaction costs or the cost of building up separate digital systems that are maybe not interoperable with each other, but building like modular building blocks that then run together for a digital public infrastructure.
Yeah, I would agree that exactly what Gerda said. And in terms of the sustainable financing for something of this, that's a piece that we're really looking into with the Linux Foundation, because they have a ability to have a subscriber model of people to contribute to the asset registry specifically to maintain that particular system. Sustainable financing is obviously one of the pieces that's that's always comes up when we talk about these digital systems. And I think it's really important to recognize the importance of development aid, and obviously in this world that we live in now where that is changing. I think it's really it's fundamental, because without development aid, none of these things would have gotten started. And then they need that initial investment of source of funding to then prove the case and make the case for why it's important. And then we can have more sustainable models built on top of those to push things forward. So I just want to make the case that this kind of funding is really critical for kind of piloting these things and getting these things started. And you can usually do that in relatively small budgets on a pilot scale, and then push it to a bigger scale once you've established it.
And just sort of going further, I think that's a crucial point that you're raising. Sort of, it would have never gotten initiated and would have never sort of be brought to an end. So now, but because you're dealing and building with such big consortia on such a global scale, how do you ensure that this sort of moves along? Who's taking the lead on which parts? Can you sort of give us some of the insights of how you bring it to success?
Yeah, sure. I think it's been really important that the partners have come together to agree on how we're mapping this out. So, I showed that big concentric circle. We've been mapping out kind of which partners are leading on which pieces from the Forest Data Partnership side, and then the broader projects, kind of who's leading on what. So I'm happy to go into more details on specific items and pieces, but it's been really heartening to see that people actually want to come together and have more collective action around this piece, because they see the benefit at the end of the day. This is work that benefits everybody and is can be shared amongst all of these partners. And so ICL, for instance, has been a wonderful partner that's raised their hand and said, we're working on these standards pieces. We convene a big group of people that can work on these standards pieces, and we want to work with you on that, and we can help lead and push some of this work forward. So they've already started pushing some of these pieces forward. That's been fantastic, so that we can loop that in to some of the other work that we're doing. And I find that that's been happening across the board. FAO is taking a big piece and pushing that forward. So Diasca has had some fantastic partners, CGIR being one of them, that's been pushing pieces of the traceability work forward in the standardization. So we've been mapping it all out, and it's been fantastic to see how collective action, bringing all these resources together, has really resulted in a larger impact because of that. And people aren't being competitive or siloed. We're working together much more smoothly than we have in the past.
Brilliant. I hope that's a good blueprint for other sort of interdisciplinary projects. And then going back to some of the questions that have popped up in the chat, there was a series of questions regarding smallholder farmers or smallholders in general. What is in it for them? How will they be included, and how can they benefit from sort of being included and using DPI?
You
do
go
you
ahead.
want to go first? Okay.
You can go ahead.
Okay. This is the question that we get the most frequently, and I think it's one of the hardest to tangibly answer right now. There's a lot of different ideas out there. The easiest one to point to is, if they're included in the system, then they aren't excluded from the supply chain. And so then they have the opportunity to participate in the EU market or other regulatory markets to show that they are deforestation free. There's a lot of red flags that get raised, though, in terms of what happens if they're not, right? Like, if they're mapped and they're not deforestation free, then they're automatically excluded. Or what happens if they're mapped and then that means they get more taxes, or now they're shown as not being fully legal, and that puts big consequences back onto the smallholder farmer that were probably unattended from our perspective, of course, but really can impact them in a very large way. So that's why I think it's really important that we look at that ethics and consent piece of the data standards work, because that's where we can really underline a lot of the risks and highlight some more tangible incentives to smallholders in terms of what does it actually mean to own your own data and to have some ownership and some ability to use that data to empower yourself to make your life more secure and prosperous. And that's the piece of work that I think needs a little bit more support and push forward, and making sure we have the right partners around the table and that we're considering all the different implications here. We did participate in a smallholder workshop that actually had smallholder farmers participating in it. And it's one of the very few that we've actually been able to be a part of. It occurred in Thailand, and it was organized by Recoff. And that was fascinating to hear kind of the different levels of capacity of some of these smallholder farmers, some who were very savvy when it came to geospatial data and knew exactly where their farm was and knew exactly how to map it, and some who had never thought of that before, never considered why that would be important, why they would need to consider it. And so I think we need to have many more of those where we're actually directly talking to smallholders and understanding what they're facing and understanding kind of what they see as an important part of the incentive structure here in order to get this right and avoid any of these unintended consequences.
Maybe just to add the aspect of efficiency. So DPI seeks to create efficiency along the supply chain, and this also includes smallholder farmers, of course. So Laura, you mentioned that you have visited farmers and they had to enter various data into various traceability systems, etc. So ideally, within a robust DPI, the DPI is citizen-centric. So the farmer owns the data, and there's a certain data sharing protocol or data standard that the farmer then can enter the data once, or has the data, and it can be entered into various different traceability systems, so that it doesn't happen that the farmer has to enter the data into 5 different traceability systems depending on where he or she sells their product to.
Brilliant. I imagine it's quite a challenge to organize these kinds of exchanges and get them sort of to the table, but I definitely do see the benefit. And also sort of the ones that do get involved, they're doing a service for so many others to have their voices be heard. So yes, I welcome those efforts and hearing that these efforts are being taken, even though obviously the global consortium is built up of much larger players. Another question that has come up was, how does DPI ensure sovereignty of producing countries are secured? You've touched upon that, but maybe more specifically, what could you reply to that?
We actually are working directly on that with FAO. They are working with the SAFE project to develop what we're calling a federated node system, so that in particular countries, and if someone who's on from FAO can put the countries in the chat, because I always forget them and say the wrong ones, and I don't want to do that. They're starting with some pilot countries to build out these federal systems to see then how they can be connected into the larger global system. And I think it's really important that that those are followed closely to make sure that the local laws are being followed in each of those different countries, and that particular data is protected. But I'm excited to see how that project goes. It's just getting off the ground now, so it's the Aim for Commodities project run out of FAO, and I think it's going to be a really good test case to see how these work and how they can connect. Of course, there are some systems that are already built, right? There are a couple of countries that have already built some systems, so I think it's important to work with, like Peru is a good example of how to get that system connected or see the lessons learned in terms of what they've struggled with or what they've found very successful.
Goody, anything you want to add, or on to the next question?
Yeah, that's fine.
And then I think, Laura, you said in your presentation that better national maps are required. And could you say something about where is that particularly the case, and in which parts of the world? And are you seeing efforts to close these gaps, and sort of will they be ready on time?
That's a great question. I think Côte d'Ivoire is an excellent example of a land use map that was done very professionally and led locally by the government there, and really pushed to have a high quality map available and out for everyone to access. So I think that's, from my perspective, one of the best standards to follow and practices to follow. And that's an important country because of the cloud cover areas where there's high cloud cover throughout the year, and it's really hard to map with remote sensing and satellite imagery, you need to have an on-the-ground effort to map those forests accurately so that you are having that national land cover map that's able to, help calibrate the broader, more global data sets and really answer some of those harder to answer questions, particularly in places where there's agroforestry systems like for cocoa and coffee, where satellite imagery can get it wrong without better data into the models. So those countries and those geographies really need the on-the-ground led and cover data.
Oh, so that seems like quite a big effort to do and sort of to accomplish until they need to be EUDR compliant. Maybe sort of taking a little bit of a higher perspective now, sort of abstracting a bit more. So do tell me when we reach the limitations of what regards your presentations. But what happens until these parts of the world are ready? What are the risks for them, or sort of will production, I mean, you mentioned it before, if you show like a smallholder is not compliant, is production going to shift away from them? Will they just be excluded? But also, what if you can't prove? What if data is not ready at the time they need to import? Will production shift away? Can these risks be managed? What can be done if the data is just not ready?
You are getting a little out of my expertise, but I think it's important to highlight the real importance to engage deeper. So not to kick people out of your supply chain or segregate them to a non-regulated market, but instead really engage deeper to understand, is it a data problem? Is it was something not mapped correctly on your farm, so it looks like you were, deforestation? And then some people will fall into that red category where they did deforest after 2020. For many different reasons this happens, right? The EU regulation maybe didn't get down to the ground level, so people were deforesting without realizing it. It may have been legal in that country for whatever reason. And in those circumstances, I think we do need to have more resources available for people to know what are the other options, what can happen for those smallholders, what other markets are available for them to engage in or be a part of, so that they aren't losing their whole livelihood because a European supplier or somebody that is supplying to Europe is dropping them out of their supply chain. So that's something that I think needs a little bit more attention. I know people are talking about it. We aren't talking about it directly, but it's important to highlight that needs to happen more directly.
Yeah, and also, I mean, just to add on that, I mean, while we are, of course, very convinced of the aspects of DPI, you should also not forget that it's a long-term effort to build it up. It's a collaborative approach, which always takes a bit more time than if you implement your proprietary traceability system, for example. But it's a really a long-term and large effort. But we get these questions a lot also within the SAFE projects, and we are implementing specific measures also within the countries that we are active with with SAFE.
And maybe as a final question, just because we have so many different types of organizations and companies present today in our audience, is there anything that you would like to address to them? Can they get involved? Can they give any support? Can they take part? How can they benefit? Anything you want to direct to them? This is what you should do now.
Yes, please get involved. I believe we'll be sharing the slides. And I will add in some more QR codes and information into the final slide that can direct you to any of the different topics that we talked about. Reach out through our website, theforestdatapartnership.org. And I think however it makes sense for you to engage, we welcome the engagement. If it's participating in the data standards working group because you have ideas on some of this people workflow that need to be solved, or you've run into challenges that we didn't mention that you think need to be highlighted, or if it's pilot testing some of the DPI technical solutions like WISP, or any of the different traceability solutions that we highlighted. InnoTrace is an excellent example of one. I think the people on this call can direct you to whoever you need to help with piloting those. And then, of course, we are always looking for more resources to help support us. So we are very eagerly and actively building consortiums for different fundraising. So if you would like to join different consortiums for fundraising, that is an option as well that we would welcome discussing with anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Also from my side. So Laura, you said it very well. There's a space for every stakeholder to engage within DPI. So there's regular DIASCA calls, there's regular FDEP calls. If you are interested, you can just reach out to us.
Brilliant. Thank you both. I think the time for question is coming to an end. So thanks again for sharing all your valuable insights and making this technical topic very approachable with good analogies and practical examples. I think everyone learned a lot. As it has been mentioned, the slides and the presentations will be shared. You can reach out to the people that have been involved. We've also linked to previous lunch break editions on the WISP project, and you can find the one also on data ownership. So at this point, I would like to thank you also in the audience very much for your active participation, your questions, and your passion. I would now like to hand over to Jorge Espinosa Santander from the SASI for his closing remarks and an outlook to the next edition, which is happening in June after an Easter and May bank holiday break. So Jorge, please, over to you, and see you next time.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Annette. Yeah, I'll be very brief because I'm mindful of the time. So thank you so much, Laura and Gude, for your valuable inputs today. And I think it was inspiring to hear about digitalization in agricultural supply chains with focus on DPI, digital public infrastructure. But I think most of all, I really appreciated the perspective from the people, from this part of this arrangement, which we normally say might be the bigger part of the iceberg. So on behalf of the whole SASI team, I would like to extend my thanks to all speakers, participants, and organizers, and of course, moderator for their valuable contributions. And I think it has been very insightful exchange on how to put DPI into practice, as I mentioned, with this people's perspective in the center, which is very important for us. And I think the discussion has once again highlighted also the importance of close collaboration at the political, economic, and societal levels to drive meaningful change. Without these, of course, it might be much difficult to come forward. For any other further questions and information, please do get in touch with the SASI anytime and sign up for our monthly newsletter to be informed about events, studies, and on our funding opportunities for more sustainability in your supply chains. And before we all leave this meeting, I would like to draw your attention to the launch of the next round of the Due Diligence Fund, which is directed towards companies. The next call for proposal has been officially published today and is open until mid-June 2025. And for more information, please visit the SASI website. Finally, I would like to cordially invite you to join us for our next SASI lunch break, which will take place on Friday, June the 6th. And we will take a little spring break in May, but we'll soon share the topic of the June's lunch break via our communication channels. So thank you so much for participating, and hopefully see you next time too. Back to you, Annette.